We want a better understanding of what's happening in the world of AI so that we can use it to grow our business. So every week, we interview founders and leaders to learn about what they're building and what our future looks like. The founders come in all shapes and sizes, from just getting their first 100 customers to scaling 9-figure venture-backed companies. Welcome to All Things AI. Let's get started. Can you help me understand what the number one metric people should care about when trying to understand their market?
In all honesty, I don't think that there is just one metric. I think there's at least a combination of two. And I'll keep it brief, but I'd say you want to understand market competitiveness. And on the other side, on the other hand, you want to understand basically market size. And if you combine those two, you get a pretty decent understanding of what the market is like.
Fantastic. Okay, and we've seen a massive change in data in the last year because of the rise in accessibility to large language models. What do you think has been the biggest change for market intelligence?
The ability to be able to analyze massive amounts of data much easier than it previously was. I think that's probably the biggest change.
Fantastic. How should companies think about their customer segments at different stages of their business?
Wow, that's a good question. I think from day one, you should be interested in this. My background is in e-commerce. I prefer to think in terms of reach and relevance. And if you don't think about customer segments from day one, I think you're missing out on massive opportunities. So start with it straight away, even if it's just a little, and expand from there.
All right, fantastic. I want to get more into that, because one of the things that I'm always thinking about for us and for our clients as well is, how do we think about reaching those customers? What's the highest efficiency rate, and what's actually going to resonate with those customers? But before we get there, I'll introduce you. This is Sebastian. You're the head of growth at Trendata. You've got 15 plus years experience in e-commerce, telecom, and fintech. You've managed growth teams of more than 50 people, and right now you're leading or head of growth at Trendata. One of the reasons why I find Trendata super interesting to talk about is you guys aren't a company who started in the AI era. You started much before that and probably called it something else, even though the methods to your madness were similar, the same. But you have seen a massive inflection point in this industry, where it does take potentially 10 to 100 times less long to interpret and learn from data. And because of that, you're very well positioned to benefit from the change in this market. So that's why I'm interested in talking to you. How do you introduce yourself?
Appreciate that. Sebastian, Chief Growth Officer at Trendata. I've worked at big telcos, as you mentioned, leading e-commerce teams, setting up e-commerce departments. And one of the things that I really, really like about Trendata is that somehow, by chance, I had an idea, I think a couple of years ago, I think 6 years ago, and that idea was, what if we would be able to analyze all those online searches in a very effective way and derive trends from that? And somehow Trendata came across, and I was like, this is actually what I was looking for. This is my idea, but somebody's actually built it. And I truly believe that this is a unique way of looking at data and also deriving trends that are very hard to uncover in other ways. So that's me, and also how I got to Trendata. And in terms of personal life, I'm from the Netherlands. I've got a girlfriend and a son, quite enthusiastic in terms of sports. So that's how I would introduce myself. But obviously there's a lot more to tell. And I think most people would be more interested in what Trendata is than about me talking about my personal life.
Let's start there. Tell me about Trendata.
So Trendata is a market intelligence platform that is able to analyze a lot of different search queries. So we analyze on average 5 billion daily search queries. And what we do by analyzing those search queries, we use AI, and we've used that for already a couple of years, even though now there's this massive AI train that's happening. We use AI to analyze this data to a massive and very granular extent, and are able to provide insights into markets, competitors, brand associations, category associations, and a lot of different things. And by using AI, we're able to do that much quicker and also much cheaper than the traditional incumbent.
Yeah, fantastic. So what type of data you're actually looking at in terms of when you're going pulling primary type research?
We like to call it online orientation data, but in layman's terms, it's what people are searching for in Google and Bing, basically the big search engines.
Oh, let's say I'm signing up as a client tomorrow. What am I getting?
Well, a warm welcome. What you'd be getting, you would be getting access to our platform for product categories that you find interesting. And that would mean that you would be able to log in, would be able to do market analysis yourself. You would be able to benchmark yourself against direct competitors or even indirect competitors. You'd be able to find retailers that are selling your product or might not even be selling your product. And also an understanding of what the people in the market, the customers in your market are looking for when they are looking for your product. And think of this as when we think about, let's say, furniture, obviously we think about sizing, dimensions, materials, stuff like that. In terms of electronics, think about features that people find important, and also the combination between, is this a feature that people just find important, or do they even associate a brand with it? Basically helping you understand as a marketer, is this something that we should really hone in on, or is it something that has been claimed by other parties and that we should stay away from? So that's what you'd be getting from day one. And if you're really good with analyzing data yourself, you can build your custom dashboards, mix and match, and go into deeper analysis by using our advanced search bar, helping you build custom queries on the data that we've made available for you.
I think we should back up a little bit. I think it's really important that we should understand like what the basics of market intelligence are, because when you say that word, I think a lot of people interpret it in different ways. So can you walk me through a bit of the basics for how you guys think about market intelligence?
I think you're right. Let's back up a little. When we talk about market intelligence, there are indeed a lot of different perspectives. So we consider market intelligence looking at the outside world, whereas you also have business intelligence, basically analyzing the internal processes, internal metrics. So when we speak about market intelligence, you could think of this as a umbrella in which different elements exist. So when you look at the outside world, obviously you'd like to understand, how big is this market I'm operating in? Who am I competing against? What are their main traits? What are threats that I should be aware of and potentially should mitigate? Who are my customers that I'm dealing with, or prospects that I could be dealing with if I tailor my messaging or offering? So basically, everything that revolves around understanding the market that you operate in or think about operating in. And the way that we like to think of it is we put customer demand at the heart of that. So rather than just analyzing your internal customers, the people that are already familiar with your offerings, we'd like to think about it as, hey, there's a whole market that actually showcases their demand because they've got a manifest information need or interest, and they actually search for that in a search engine, and we try to capture that. And that's why we call it online orientation behavior, because it obviously precedes the end transaction that happens on a website or in a retail store.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. And I guess from a scoping perspective, where do you guys really focus? Is it kind of on the top of the intent funnel, or is it throughout that funnel of, first search, clicking on the website, maybe putting something in a cart? Where do you guys really embed yourself in that process?
Prior to going to a brand website or a retailer's website, you would be orientating yourself in a search engine. And we're able to capture all of that information in the majority of markets, in the majority of product categories. What we cannot do, and I think this is a good thing, what we cannot do is make a journey out of that, because that would mean that we would be analyzing individual profiles. And fortunately, there's legislation regarding GDPR, et cetera, et cetera. So what we cannot do is tell you exactly what an individual journey is looking like, but we're able to give you a broad perspective of the different information needs that somebody has, or demand that somebody has across their customer journey. But we can only provide that level of detail on an aggregated basis. And I think that's a good thing for us as customers, because that's what we are in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that's a good thing for marketers too, because it's not so helpful really to look at one data set.
It kind of depends what business you're in, right? I mean, if you're selling only to a handful of people, but you probably know them on a
Sure.
one-on-one basis anyway. But it's hard to derive proper insights from just speaking with two or three different people. I mean, is that really the lens on the market that you want to have, or do you want to understand it on a much wider and also deeper level by analyzing the majority of people, or basically everybody who's searching and exploring different options?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think that like a lot of people get right early on about understanding their market, and what do you think they get wrong on? And I'll maybe preface this question by saying I think for AI as a category, something that people have a lot of awareness on is like things that tend to be flashy, like image generation. But I personally don't feel like that's going to be the place where the industry actually makes a significant amount of value, because it's just not something that is super valuable to a lot of people. Like, sure, it's helpful for marketers, sure, it's helpful for content creators, but outside of that, most of us aren't marketers, most of us aren't content creators, most of us work a job.
But and just so I get you right, are you looking for the perspective on what they get right in terms of how they go about doing business, or how they go about doing market research?
Yeah, sure. So early on in the process, when people are getting into market intelligence, what do you see companies and potential customers of yours getting right early on? And what do you see them getting wrong?
I think one of the most important things that fortunately a lot of companies actually understand is that knowing who their customers are and what they find important is something that all companies are looking for and are after. And that's a good thing. People actually see the value of understanding their market in detail. The problem, on the other hand, is that knowing that there's value and appreciating that there's more to explore are two different things. So, what I'd say that a lot of companies get wrong is that they're scratching the surface and they get some high level insights. Hey, the market is growing by X% this year. We're competing with brands X, Y, and Z. But what they forget is that customer needs are evolving over time, and keeping tabs on that actually allows you to be a lot more agile and quicker to the market than your competitors. So it's not just a do it once and forget about it. It's a please monitor and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, that makes sense a lot. And actually, you see that a lot in early stage companies. They do the high level analysis of what the market looks like in 5 to 10 years. But in the next 3 weeks, kind of very misunderstood,
Yeah,
frankly,
yeah, and I
or at
think
least not to the detail that it should be.
and also just a perspective. It's so you analyze, and what you want to do is then maybe amend your messaging or amend your offering. And it's not just, hey, we've analyzed it and we use it for reporting, just for reporting, but you actually want to do something with it rather than just understanding your market. I mean, lovely all those fancy graphs and where the market is going to, but if you don't act on it, well, to some extent, it's still useless.
Yeah, if you don't capitalize on the information, it doesn't move the needle. You talked a little bit about what the number one metric and the number two metric. Let's get a little bit into that. Remind me, what was your answer for what the number one metric people should care about are when they're trying to understand their market?
So I mentioned two, and I think that the two most important metrics when trying to understand your market is market competitiveness. I'll go into more detail, and market size. And I mentioned two different metrics because you cannot really think about them in isolation. So market competitiveness says something about how much of the market is being dominated by brands or retailers, and how much of that is still, let's say, up for grabs. And obviously, markets that are very much dominated by strong brands that have a significant presence are much harder to penetrate into than markets that are still very much open. And I think AI is a brilliant example of that. Sure, there are a lot of different initiatives, but there's, apart from OpenAI, I wouldn't say that there's a particular brand that's massively outperforming all other brands. So the market competitiveness for AI, even though there are a lot of players active, it's not dominated by a household name. As for instance, the sneakers industry, where you would have Nike and Adidas, for instance, claiming that, or Apple claiming the smartphone market, for instance. So market competitiveness gives you an understanding of do you actually have a chance when going into that market? And market competitiveness also says something about seniority or um, uh, market age, market the life cycle of that market, so to say. And on the other hand, you don't want to understand just that the market is very competitive. You also want to understand that the market is actually sizable, growing, or shrinking. So you have to combine those two to get a thorough understanding, or at least a basic understanding of what's happening in your landscape.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess like the very simple version is you want a very fast growing market with a huge piece of the pie that's still on the table for people, anybody to go after.
Couldn't have explained
And
it better myself.
obviously, that's like a very simple version of what you said, but yeah, we don't want to be selling newspapers. That's a very good example of where the pie is getting smaller and it's dominated by several massive organizations.
And there are a lot of different examples for the markets that we've been analyzing. So obviously, it's much harder to enter the smartphone market than it is for, let's say, a makeup brand, where it's not as
Yeah,
much
sure.
dominated by brands, but you would be focused on going to a retailer to buy something, for instance.
In the context of like early stage companies, how can they think about their customer segmentation very early on?
There are different ways of thinking about your customer segmentation early on. I think this is more a generic marketing question rather than a trend data question. And I think it starts with understanding the different needs that somebody could have and trying to come up with the personas that fit, that have those different needs. And allow me to give an example on this. So let's say you're a car manufacturer and you produce small cars. You might have those traditional soccer mom being one of your personas, or you would have a small and young family that's looking for a affordable car. They might have complete different needs, but by understanding that, you'd be able to tailor your messaging towards those specific audience, but also be able to go after them in terms of targeting and being able to tailor your product in the end to their specific needs, and maybe even come up with different products. Just so trying to come up with segmentation up front and trying to validate it, and obviously we can help with that, but trying to do that upfront will allow you to be a little bit more specific. We were earlier on, we were speaking about relevance versus reach. I think relevance outperforms reach any day of the week. And this allows you to be very relevant for that specific audience, even if you have to trial and error your way into having a perfect messaging or a perfect product. But I think you can't get started early enough with customer segmentation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially when you don't have a lot of reach.
Absolutely. All companies that are on a budget
Yeah,
struggle.
which is every company ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, it gets a little bit easier when you get bigger. But yeah, start with it straight away and find your most valuable customers as early on as possible.
One of the things that actually is a little bit of a black box for me is brand monitoring. I'm somewhat familiar with brand monitoring, and maybe I guess I should start by asking you, what is brand monitoring?
You mentioned something earlier that also applies to brand monitoring, because you could ask this to probably five different people and you would get five different responses. Brand monitoring, in essence, is understanding what your brand is about and understanding if it's growing in popularity or not. If you look at big telcos, what they are interested in is understanding brand awareness, how many people know our brand, top of mind. And the secondary metric is brand consideration. So how much of those people that are aware of my brand actually consider purchasing me. And I think I like that approach because it gives an understanding of, or at least a lens of what people find important. Because you could more or less dissect brand consideration in what are the buying reasons that somebody has. So when we speak about brand monitoring, we like to combine those different elements. So we'd like to understand, is your brand growing in popularity, both in the absolute way, but also relative to other brands? We like to think about brand consideration in a way that what are the buying reasons? So brand A might be recognized for specific features or specific audience that we spoke to about earlier, whereas brand B might have something completely different. So what are those brand considerations, the considerations somebody has when buying a specific brand? And also some brands are used for different things, even though they compete in the same domain. And for instance, a smartwatch is a great example of that. You would not buy a Fitbit for the same reason as you would buy a Samsung watch or an Apple watch. It's a very specific use case, and understanding these differences and being able to capitalize on that. That's where we believe that brand monitoring really helps you with. So it's basically understanding what role your brand plays in the market.
And do you have the perspective that brand monitoring is similarly important to customer understanding your customer segmentation? Or is it something that kind of comes later on in the process of scaling up your marketing intelligence?
And this depends on who you're asking. So if you're thinking about brand monitoring, what it's often perceived is, hey, let's keep track of social mentionings. Is there what's the social sentiment that people have revolving around the brand? And if you think of brand monitoring like that, you would say it comes later because that's only of interest when you actually have customers that are
Hmm.
either brand ambassadors or massively complaining about the poor customer service or the poor products that you've been making. Um, we think of it slightly different, so we would say it's across the full board. But understanding your customers or prospective customers, so to say, I think should always come first, um, because that's where you build your strategy around. But they can go hand in hand. It's definitely not something that you should neglect and just go after customer segmentation. I think doing both of that at the same time, especially when you're a somewhat established brand, yeah, will give you massive gains.
That's interesting. The reason why I asked that is because, well, I just think about the context that I've had, the companies that I've worked in. It seems to me like brand monitoring is often one of those things that you do the analysis and then you look at the same graph for, you know, 12 to 18 months, and that probably burns your ears a little bit to hear it. But it's certainly not scrutinized in the same way that customer segmentation seems to be.
No, and I think you're right if you just track those, let's say, top of the funnel metrics. So brand awareness and brand consideration. If you're just checking and tracking those two metrics, it's very hard to influence those metrics in the very short term. So monthly or even quarterly updates don't tend to show massive fluctuations. The underlying reasons, so the underlying buying reasons for your particular brand are a little bit easier to change. And obviously this has to do with your marketing efforts. If you're going fully above the line, maybe have TV ads or have a brand shout that you really want to claim, you probably be able to measure that a little bit earlier before people that might not even be aware of your brand are aware of your brand. So especially the people that are susceptible to your brand message, so they know you already and might even consider you, how their perspective changes is obviously a little bit easier to influence. And that's something that we would add with brand monitoring rather than just those top of the funnel metrics. Hey, is my brand actually recognizable? Do people know me? And do they consider me when they are actually purchasing? But you're able to analyze that. And the way that we come up with brand awareness and brand consideration is by a metric that we, and not just us, fortunately, there's been a lot of good research done by other people on this topic, is something that we refer to as share of search. So share of search says something about how much of all brand searches are regarding your brand. And it's a great predictor of future market share. So by tracking it in the way that we do it, you'd be able to steer away from potential crisis or definitely double down on the things that are going well. And it's a way to give you just another competitive edge. So the traditional brand monitoring, I'm with you. You don't need that. Fortunately, a lot of companies only do that every once a quarter. But yeah, you could go in much more detail, more granular, and that actually allows you to really capitalize on those insights rather than just I won't call it a vanity metric because I think it's important, but a top line metric that is a little bit harder to understand.
Is share of search an indicator for like a precursor to purchase? Like you'll see share of search, see that rising, I don't know, maybe 3 months before you actually see the buying funnel start?
Yes, but there's lag time, and the lag time depends on. And I need to be careful here because there's been scientific research done by us in combination with universities as well. But what we've seen from the research that we've conducted with them, that the more expensive, or more important the purchases you're making, the more lag time exists, and it makes sense. When you're buying a car, it takes a lot longer to actually go from your initial orientation to a purchase. Whereas if you're buying a shirt or a jacket, that moment from, hey, I'm going to buy this product to the actual purchase is obviously a lot shorter. So it's a precursor, but the lag time depends on how important or also how painful it is when your decision goes wrong. So that's the distinction between the two.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. Of course, it's going to take a lot more time for you to figure out whether a car is worth purchasing rather than like a t-shirt.
And maybe one thing to add to that, because you triggered me with your comment on brand monitoring. So just having a standalone measure of, let's say, brand consideration or brand awareness, it helps you. But share of search has a slightly different connotation to it as well. Obviously, if you're Toyota and you have car issues, or Philips with their sleep apnea apparatus, you would obviously get people searching for your brand, even though they don't consider buying your product, but they want to return it or complain about it or anything like that. So you have to constantly monitor that rather than just doing a measurement every month or just once in a half a year or something like that. You want to understand how it's evolving over time because those could be discrepancies you would otherwise be unaware of.
And frankly, important details, key details to
Key
understanding what's
details.
going on. Okay, let's transition the conversation a little bit. In the beginning, we talked a little bit about how there's been a big of an inflection point with AI and how we use data with large language models. Tell me a little bit about how Trendata has in the past or is now working with artificial intelligence.
Trend has been around for about a year or five. And what we've done in the past was a lot of bespoke work for our clients. They came up with a research question. We gathered those online searches related to that research question. And then we did some, well, at that time still a lot of manual digging through that data, trying to come up with trends. Over the course of the last couple of years, we've developed our AI that really understands what people are searching for and also understands why people are searching for that. And that's the next level that we try to incorporate because, well, we're never searching for just maybe 2 to 3 words. Sorry, we're only searching for 2 to 3 words, maybe four at max. And it could mean a lot of different things. I mean, that's where the biggest challenge sits. So we've incorporated AI into analyzing what people are searching for, what people find of importance. What's happening now is, I think, just the natural understanding of what people find important. Has gotten so much easier. And the extra level of detail that we've added to it is understanding why people are searching for it as well. So I think it's a good thing that it's a little bit more mainstream. And I think that's also one of the biggest challenges, that just the fact that it's easier to use doesn't necessarily mean that we're using it in a proper way.
Yeah, I understand. That's to me, it sounds like it's just so much easier to consume and make actionable insights with the quantity of data. I mean, maybe 5 years ago, it was a team of researchers, a team of data analysts, and a team of marketers looking at the data. And now it's less so. Getting to that actionable insight is faster.
Absolutely, it's getting so much easier, and the challenge obviously sits with the industry nuances that exist and still making sense of it. So there's not a one size fits all solution for every single industry. There's still some handwork to be added, which is also interesting, and I think that's probably what we'll be acknowledging in maybe a couple of years, that AI is helping us, but training it to specific use cases in much more detail is probably where the real challenge sits.
And I think, like what you mentioned earlier with furniture and electronics, is obviously you're not comparing furniture on a feature by feature basis, but you are comparing electronics in that way. I mean, that's probably a good example of that.
Yeah, I think spot on.
Obviously, you think about trends a lot in terms of what's happening in markets, what's happening with your own market. I'm trying to always figure out is how do you actually see the difference in a fad to like an actual long-term trend?
You don't. Uh,
Okay.
no, I think that this is the underlying question is, how much appetite for risk do you have? Yeah, we're able to spot trends really early, but there are a lot of different trend patterns, and we've got brilliant data scientists that could go on about that for hours and hours. But there are different trend patterns. The most likely one is just seasonal topics. Think swimwear, for instance, or maybe winter sports. And we're pretty confident about those. I mean, sure, they're growing, they're shrinking a little, but that's about how it goes. But if you've got those hypes, the fidget spinner that we are all aware of, what's that? I mean, sure, you could identify it quite early on, but would you have enough appetite for risk to step into that domain, still an uncovered market? So you'd be able to go after that, but you wouldn't know upfront if it's a proper trend. The only thing that I can say about it is that if it's rising really fast in a very short time, chances are that it's just a hype and that will fade away. And AI might be the exception, as was the internet. But yeah, I think that's the only thing that I could properly say about that. But in the end, it's about your appetite for risk.
Yeah, I guess I've never thought about it in the context of actually chasing after the trend or chasing after what's happening in the moment in that way. But obviously, if you have a huge appetite for risk and a lot of capital to deploy, it's an easier step to take on a short-term trend because you have a sense that that pie is growing quite rapidly. You have a sense that it's a totally underserved market, but you don't really have a sense as to if it's going to exist in 3 months
Yeah,
or
is it
not.
lasting? Yeah, indeed. And that makes it interesting. And it's also something that we've got conversations with clients about, of course, when they are asking us, what should we do? And then you get into the point, yeah, sure, we're able to provide you with insights, but in the end, it's a strategic decision. No, 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 they should be making it, not us. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we would soon go out of business if we start making those decisions for our clients.
So what do you typically see as like early signs of trends? Is there any signals that you pick up on earlier than your clients or other competitors, for example?
Yeah, I think there's a nice example of just the way that how we go about collecting data. So there are three ways of being able to do market research. So you could be asking potential customers, prospects, questions about your product, about the market, etc., etc. So customer surveys and panels is one. The second one is being able to analyze transactional data, which is very reliable. It provides you with great insights, but it also requires a transaction to take place. And the third one is like online data. And one of the benefits of having online data is that there's just so much data available. And we prefer to use search data. So for search data, you don't actually need to have a product available. There doesn't need to be a transaction. People start searching for problems that they experience. So think about it as searching for a specific context that could be of interest for your business is very helpful to find out trends that you could capitalize on. And it's much harder to do that either on those surveys or customer panels just because of the size of those panels and also the cost of it. And especially on transactional data, it's very, very hard to find transactions for products that don't exist yet. Yeah, I think that's a nice way of looking at it.
So outside of Trendata, what trends do you see happening that you think are potentially kind of mega style trends in the future? The reason why I'm asking this is I'm genuinely curious about what we're working on or things that are totally outside of what we're working on, just looking at the trends and seeing how they play out. Is there anything in particular you're looking at and being like, wow, that's really interesting?
And you're referring to societal trends? Should have given this a little bit more thought up front. I've got one, and it's got to do with AI. And I'd like to think of this actually, it might actually be a bad thing happening. So with all of us working on I think we all agree on the fact that this allows massive productivity gains. It even helps with creativity. But there's one element of it that we shouldn't neglect, and that it's an aid rather than an absolute reality. So we shouldn't just be chasing after all these great solutions, going after those recommendations that they're giving us. And we should not stop thinking ourselves as a human being, as a strategist. We should not neglect that. And I think that's something that I see that a lot of us are starting to hide behind the tools and really forget about that there's actually a brain inside your hat that you should use. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that I do notice. It might not be the societal trend that you'd be after, but yeah, and I think that's definitely something that I see happening around me. That we put a lot of faith in the technology around us, even if there's still room for interpretation.
I think one example, really easy, tangible example of this is if you get in a car with a new driver and they throw it in reverse and immediately look at the camera and don't even check their mirrors. And, you know, those mirrors exist for a reason because you need to have perspective on what's going on around you
Absolutely, yeah.
and not just rely on the camera itself. I understand. We get lots of recommendations from like Google Analytics and other tracking that we do. And we honestly, I would say we have to pay attention to what the insights are from Google Analytics. You know, this is potentially a very sophisticated form of insights from maybe one of the most sophisticated companies on the planet. But frankly, how we interpret them and actually apply them has been in the lower percentage bracket for sure. And it's mostly because we don't think they're thinking about how we're going after our market in the same way. So they're providing insights that they think we should make decisions on, but they obviously have no context as to what we're actually trying to do.
It's the strategic perspective, and also I'd like to think about why you're getting those recommendations as well. And I don't want to discredit Google because I think it's an awesome firm, but their model is fully based around advertising income as well. So some recommendations
Yes.
are good for you and for Google, and others might be, in retrospect, better for Google than for you. And might not be something that we should be broadcasting, but that's my personal opinion on this.
All right. Well, I think we covered a lot in this conversation. How can people find you?
They should definitely check out our website, which is trendata.io. And obviously, we'd appreciate speaking with them. So book a demo.
Cheers. Well, thanks, Sebastian. I very much appreciate this conversation.